I have the pleasure of being joined today by Jonathan Fisher. Now, Jonathan is the Chief Executive Officer at Cauldron Energy Limited. It's an ASX-listed energy transition explorer which owns the world-class Yanri uranium project in Western Australia. Jonathan, great to see you. Welcome to the show, and thanks for making time to catch up.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here.
So I've been tracking you and your company for some time, as we discussed offline. But I wonder, for our audience who may not know you as well as I do, and particularly your company, if you could just give us a brief overview of your role, your remit there as CEO at Cauldron, and maybe just what a day in the life of Jonathan Fisher currently entails.
Yeah, sure. So, David, I've been the CEO of Cauldron now for about 18 months. Cauldron was a recap. So the company has been around for a long time. Had actually been a bit of a high flyer, but when the WA government changed its uranium mining policy and banned uranium mining, Cauldron's fortunes suffered. And so I was brought in to right the ship, focus again on uranium, given it is a massive growth story at the moment, and continue to develop the Yanri project at the same time as I push to change the uranium mining ban in WA. So, what does a day in the life of Jono look like? You'll notice, everyone knows I'm very active in both traditional media as well as social media and government meetings, just aiming at elevating the level of the discussion within WA with respect to uranium mining and getting that changed, as well as successfully, continuing pre-development works at Yanri. So we're drilling at the moment in there. So good news.
So you're an ASX listed company, Cauldron Energy Limited. Give us a brief outline of kind of what the business is, or what the core business for Cauldron is, and I wonder if you just give us a little more detail on kind of what Yanri is in particular.
Yeah, so our strategy, as we've said it, is exploring the energy transition. So for us, uranium is core to that. Nuclear baseload, zero carbon megawatt hour is very important for global decarbonisation. But it does also allow us to look a little bit broader than uranium. So we are looking at acquisitions, in other jurisdictions and in other minerals as well. Our foundation asset is Yanri, which is one of the biggest uranium projects in WA, and it is what is known as an ISR asset, or in situ recovery. Look, that is just the best, hands down, most attractive style of uranium deposit and method of development, because it's extremely cheap to develop, and it's low OPEX, and it's environmentally friendly. So when you look at all the major uranium projects that have come online in the last 20 years, most of them have actually been ISR assets.
Right. You've had some news recently with regard to establishing a new senior executive team, and you've undergone some new branding. Give us a little insight into that.
Yeah, so look, one of the things that I did when I came in was refresh a number of things. The things that attracted me to Cauldron was that we had a new chairman, Ian Mulholland. Ian is, I need to remember, he's won Explorer of the Year. I think twice actually, which is kind of unheard of. So he's an extremely well-respected geologist. I'm not a geologist, so having someone strong in a technical role, as the chairman, is really important for me. And I'll give you a demonstration of the value. We delivered a scoping study 6 months ago. We were able to deliver that internally because my chairman was able to do the technical part and I was able to do the commercial part. So,
right.
Having a chairman who actually adds value as opposed to just runs through, an agenda at a board meeting, I mean, it's fantastic. We've all new technical resources, and the corporate team is built out by myself and a chap called Mike Fry, who's, I don't know how many years, 30. I don't want to say how old he is, but maybe 35 years experience in all these sort of corporate. I'm really happy with the team. I run the company with what I call a no dickheads policy. So it's just a great place to be, and we all work well together, and I don't tolerate fools. So yeah, fantastic, enjoying it.
That's a classic Aussie company policy, isn't it? Suffer no fools. But you're right, it does make a significant difference having actual practitioners and experienced people on the board, and particularly a chairperson who actually knows what they're talking about and can talk the talk and walk the walk. It is a game changer for almost every company I've been involved in, versus a room full of MBAs who, with the greatest respect, bring great deals to the business, but if they can't sit down and write a paper with you, then you've got to go and find that resource for it. Now, I recently saw a post you put out, which for our audience's sake drove kicking off this particular conversation sooner than later. You recently visited ANSTO's Lucas Heights open pool Australian Lightwater nuclear reactor, otherwise known as OPAL. And just for our audience, Australia's OPAL reactor is a state-of-the-art 20 megawatt multi-purpose reactor that uses low enriched uranium fuel for a range of activities, from human health through to enabling research and supporting a more sustainable environment and provide innovative solutions for industry as a whole. And the OPAL reactor actually was opened by our then Prime Minister, John Howard, back in 2007, and went into operation to actually replace its predecessor, the high flux Australian reactor, otherwise known as HIFAR, which ran from, I think, 1958 from memory to 2007. It was a 10 megawatt research reactor that commenced operations back in 1958 and was actually permanently shut down as late as January the 30th, 2007 from memory. What brought you to go and visit OPAL in the first place?
So I've got a background in the radiation space across the value chain. And so I actually previously built a radioactive waste repository, and I also used to buy and sell nuclear power stations when I was in the UK. So used to climbing all over large scale reactors, but I'd actually never been up to see the OPAL reactor. So took a tour up there with the opportunity. We had some VIPs in Australia from let's call them major friendly companies and countries, and took the opportunity to have a behind the scenes tour of Lucas Heights, and it is just, look, I'll just say what a phenomenal facility that is. There is a program in New South Wales for school kids to go and visit Lucas Heights, and I just think every kid should see that facility, and frankly, every politician should as well. To see the national capability that we have, it's astounding.
Indeed. Well, Australia's OPAL reactor is known worldwide as one of the best performing research and medical isotope reactors on the planet, right?
Yeah.
Now, there was a point that I just wanted to highlight to get some further context on. When you attended the site with some of these VIPs internationally as guests, you noted they were blown away. And I'm going to paraphrase it. I think you said that one of them said, I was told Australia didn't have a nuclear capability, and this is amazing. What's kind of behind that? What sort of drove to that comment?
Yeah, well, I think the government in Australia does not celebrate our capability in ANSTO, and that's going back a long time. We're not proud of what we've achieved and the capability that we have, and without being political, I'm going to get a little bit political. The Labor government currently is really anti-radiation, anti-nuclear, so they're not really, in the mindset of championing what we can do. So all of us have grown up in Australia in a vacuum of information, and not really being proud of what we can do at ANSTO. That's number one. And obviously, with the election coming up, and the very political, obviously, situation around civilian nuclear energy, that sort of Australia can't do it attitude has been amplified by the left as one of the reasons why we shouldn't be looking at pursuing civilian nuclear energy, because we don't have any capability, we can't do it on time, we're behind the rest of the world. And so that's the message that gets out there internationally. Well,
Right.
The reality is somewhat different. We have some of the world's best regulations. We have PANZA, ANSTO, we have ASNO, which is the Safeguards and Non-Proliferation Office, that looks after our export of uranium and other nuclear materials. It's extremely well respected, and we have a capability within ANSTO that is unprecedented. And so ANSTO's Lucas Heights reactor is now being used as a model for other research reactors being built around the world. There aren't that many of them. And as you mentioned, it's the fact that multi-purpose, it can do so many different things. surprisingly in an efficient way.
Mm.
And so now that reactor design is now being used to build a couple of other reactors, although they're looking at slightly bigger at 30 megawatts. But it's an absolute successful story for Australia, something we should be proud of.
Yeah, I was reading some data just preparing for this conversation, and I was interested to find that 2023, America reported that 73 million homes were provided clean power by nuclear stations currently being run across the US. And, you know, to put that in context, that is more than twice the Australian population. And without issue. And I think a lot of people might knee-jerk react around, you know, the three big incidents that people across generations may know, such as 3 Mile Island in America, and obviously Chernobyl,
Yeah.
an entire Netflix series made about it in the previous USSR, and then of course, you know, Fukushima more recently. There've been some other incidents, but on the whole, you know, yes, they are big and scary things. But here we are in Australia, and interestingly, you know, what ANSTO is doing is providing medical research and isotopes for an international market, not just Australia, right? But what really caught my attention was that you noted that Lucas Heights have a field leach trial set up in place that explorers such as yourself in the mining industry, particularly in uranium, can actually rent instead of having to build your own. I wonder if you could just expand on that for our audience who may or may not have, you know, a full appreciation of what that actually means. Because I think about this in the context of other technology things. You know, cloud computing, for example, allows people to use IT infrastructure without buying it or implementing it, building it, or having skills. And now we've got AI capabilities where, as a software as a service, you can just plug into it. I imagine in many ways this field leach trial, where you can go and rent that infrastructure and facility, and I guess get access to their expertise as well, is a game changer for operators like yourself.
Oh, look, it is. So what happens, I mentioned that we have an ISR asset. So that's the best way, cheapest, most environmentally friendly way of a uranium mine. Only do it if your deposit is amenable to that type. So ours is, that's good. And to prove that up, kind of like you drill test wells in oil and gas, or in certain hydrological situations, we need to do test wells for the in situ recovery and leaching of the uranium. Now, to do that, you would usually have to build your own pilot plant, essentially, and that's not cheap, to be frank. And you know, as a junior uranium company, where I prefer to put more money into the ground and into development of our asset, it's fantastic that, you know, we don't have to spend many millions of dollars building our own facility. We can rent it from ANSTO. So you know, hopefully there aren't too many people looking to use that kit. So hopefully, when I want to use it, then it's absolutely ready to go. And you know, that just saves us capex, and it helps. You know, that facility can come with a whole lot of technical expertise, as you say. So all round, that's where ANSTO is helping industry, you know, develop and be a world leader.
Yeah, it sort of falls into that as a service model that we see in a lot of technology, and now we're seeing it in, you know, ad tech, martech, fintech. You know, companies can stick to their core business, in which case, in your case, it's exploring and finding the resource, and then tapping into, you know, essentially reactor as a service, I guess, in many ways, or lab as a service. What other research work are they doing that you think that Australians uranium miners such as yourselves might be able to tap into?
Yeah, so I'm particularly passionate about the nuclear medicine part, frankly. Just, you know, there's some history, I guess, for my family there. You know, ANSTO's OPAL reactor currently produces about 25%, but up to 50% of the world's supply of molybdenum-99, Mo-99,
Wow.
which is absolutely critical in nuclear medicine and nuclear scanning as for certain cancers. Now, the reason that gets all the more critical is because the other major supplier is Russia. And you know what? We don't really want to buy, no one around the world in the Western world wants to buy Russian stuff anymore. And so, you know, ANSTO is now a world leader in that. And it almost brings me to tears at times when I explain this to the public, that our Labor government, you mentioned that John Howard opened OPAL. He had to do a deal in the back room with the Greens and the Australian Democrats because Labor refused to support it. And so, you know, you sit there and go, there are politicians in this country refusing to support ANSTO and champion what we're doing there at Lucas Heights, yet want the benefits of any of their friends, family, or colleagues when they get cancer, get world-leading treatment. Well,
Right.
you know, you really should be understanding where that capability and those medicines come from and be thankful for it. And especially, you know, so for my family, prostate cancer is a thing that's affected us. And, you know, the world's next level of prostate cancer research is being done at ANSTO. I mean,
Wow.
it's just fantastic. And, you know, there's more of that to come. So, you know, we should celebrate this as a country.
Yeah, you know, a couple of key points you mentioned there, just to highlight for our audience who may not have caught it. But when you mentioned that 25% of the world's supply, I mean, 1/4 of the world's medical needs in this space being met
Of Mo99, correct?
well,
Yeah,
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 in little old
particular
Australia
item.
is quite mind-blowing, right? And as you said, you know, over time sanctions come and go, and we need to be able to adjust to them. And you know, I'm sure the wine industry has had an experience around that with various sanctions being placed on them, and as have others. Well, you know, you made an interesting point much earlier on, which I'd like to circle back on just briefly as well, which may have escaped your audience, and that is that, you know, the messaging, particularly what you're working on. I know you recently were at the Western Australian Mining Club, for example, at lunch and talking about many of these things. And again, you know, as you said in that conversation, you know, you don't aim to be political, but necessarily you probably need to raise some political notes. And that is, you know, around the world in conversations, I've been talking to people, and you know, there's this trend now where, you know, kids in Asia, particularly China, want to be astronauts, and kids in certain parts of the world want to be in business. But then other parts of the world, they just want to be a YouTuber. You know, what are they aspiring to? And so I really do agree with you that, you know, and it's, you know, for example, I'm a proud parent of a 20-year-old son and a 23-year-old daughter, and we drag them around the world and made them travel. And now one of their passions is to travel, and it gave them an amazing outlook on the world of what's outside of Australia and what outside of, you know, sort of the Netflix generation, YouTube generation. But the idea of kids going to do this tour at the OPAL site, becoming aware of it, learning about it, that's really, in my mind, so valuable, because if they're not getting it through normal day-to-day means, you know, as you said in your talk with WA Mining, it isn't necessarily on the world news every day. It isn't necessarily being promoted, and governments come and go. But, you know, when you think about what ANSTO is going to do from, let's say, you know, the 50s through to now with 2 platforms, it's just mind-blowing to think that we are supplying in one particular resource 1/4 of the world's needs. And I think this is going to become more and more relevant when we think about just the core issues we're facing on a day-to-day basis. Like, for example, energy challenges and data centers is something that you recently posted on, and I'd love to get your thoughts around this. You know, where a lot of people don't understand that all the things that they take for granted, whether it's just talking to Siri in their iPhone or Google on their Android phone, that has to run somewhere. It runs on a computer, it runs in a data center. It's not sort of some magical thing out in the quote unquote cloud. Cloud generates other people's computers. I'd love to get your thoughts and insights around what you're seeing with regard to the energy challenges that big industry groups such as data centers in Australia are facing currently.
Yeah, so I do interact with, you know, CEOs of data center companies in my work on the Uranium Forum and Nuclear Forum, Minerals Council, and you know, the story there and their views, it's really interesting. And these are even government people. So the government obviously runs a huge amount of data centers. And those people that are responsible for running those data centers, you know, a little bit divorced, I guess, from government policy. But those people running those data centers are worried about the amount of baseload power we have available. And, you know, and as you know better than I, the enormous amounts of energy required for, you know, generative AI, you know, queries. It is explosive in, you know, the amount of energy that is going to go towards data centers as a percentage of our total grid. You know, in places like Ireland, you know, you're looking at data center consumption up to 30% of the grid. In the US, it looks like it will be going from about 3% to 10%. Just enormous amounts of growth over a very short period of time. With these things, well, they kind of need to be on, right? It's not, they're not a technology or an industrial use or which will tolerate intermittency. So you need always on, stable, regular, stable pricing, and, for sustainability purposes, zero carbon. Well, internationally, the way that, the data centers and big tech are going, they're looking at nuclear. You've got Bill Gates building his own in TerraPower in Wyoming that's currently under construction. Microsoft are going nuclear. Google's going nuclear. Where we can't get nuclear, they're going renewable. But that is an issue in Australia in terms of the amount of baseload that we're going to have. And, the people I talk to, they're really worried about it. They're constrained on growth.
Yeah, well, the world's moving more and more heavily towards a tech-dependent ecosystem. Excuse me. I mean, we're seeing the massive uptake of technology-driven solutions for a range of things, whether it's cars moving towards electric vehicles, and yet the infrastructure isn't necessarily being put in place. Transport in general, and we roll out electric trains. That infrastructure, as far as the train system, goes in place, but then the energy network has to try and catch up. It always seems to me that there's a catch up, and particularly in the IT world that I've come from. We've assumed that our power is going to be there, and then we build this infrastructure and we get a little bit of a shock. And then there's this sort of dirty secret that behind every data center, there's at least a dozen trucking bays where people can quickly rush in diesel to power the generators. And then, and I've been in so many data centers at times when the power hasn't necessarily gone out or had a brownout even, but just the load hasn't carried, and you can hear the generators kick in. You can almost hear it through the concrete in the floor, because often they're either out the back or in the basement. And, when people are sort of just surfing the web or watching Netflix, what they don't realize is there's a diesel generator that's kicked in somewhere that's powering that. And it is great that green energy can be used. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation we won't get into today. But in many ways, someone argued with me the other day that, technology can sort of follow the sun, so we can get green energy and wind around the world on demand, that, we can follow the sun so that the Google searches or the Netflix stuff can be hosted somewhere else. But I said, well, that's great unless you're an Australian company that wants to do your processing at night and the computers are not really up to it. Which invariably is the case at 24/7. We don't necessarily just wake up and turn on computers for server infrastructure. But it's interesting that you talk about the investments being made around the world, particularly from the hyperscalers and the big name brands in potentially micro hydro nuclear stations. And it kind of reminds me of what we did in the IT world, where we thought when we were rolling out the internet, one of the biggest challenges was actually putting the content as close as possible to human beings. And a concept called the content delivery network was put in place, or caching. So even if you had a website somewhere in Canada, you could actually use a content delivery network to put a cached copy of your content around the world, so that it was delivered as close as possible to where that consumer was over time, to remove that load from around the world. And I think that's something we're going to see more and more in power, in my view, that I'm sure you are seeing firsthand. That is, it's great that we have these massive sites that can do some of that base load, but on demand, it takes time for that to spin up. And we're seeing that with coal fire environments now, where they've got to run almost at a certain high performance level, even if people aren't using them, just in case they do, because it takes time to spin them up and push those electrons around. I imagine when you think about that growth in not just the core IT needs, what do you think is going to happen when we see this explosive sort of J-curve or hockey stick uptake of really, really high energy workloads such as artificial intelligence, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, but when you just go and web search something or Google it, people say that's a very, very low energy workload. It's already built and cooked and sitting there pre-indexed. But when you're doing generative AI and having a conversation with a computer, it sometimes takes $1 billion+ to build and train these models, but it also takes hundreds of millions of dollars per month to run them. Where's that energy going to come from?
Well, and that's interesting, because what I think you'll be seeing is obviously those data centers migrating to where there's cheap load power. And therefore the economic benefits associated with hosting those facilities and everything else, as well as data security issues and things like that, centering around where there's plentiful power. Now, that on our current trajectory, that's not going to be in Australia. And so, I would be urging, people to consider, the benefits of, of nuclear energy to help in that regard. And we can talk a lot about costs and everything else in models, and the GenCost model, which is the main model that is used in Australia. The thing that GenCost doesn't do is provide a real option analysis to say, well, what is the benefit of power? GenCost doesn't do that.
Right.
It is a simple scenario. And how would new industry be attracted to Australia if we did have plentiful zero carbon baseload power? So yeah, there's a lot of things that need to go into our consideration on future generation mix. And certainly, it's cooking up to be a very interesting election cycle over the next sort of 6 months.
It is. I think over the generations, and I'm old enough, and it's going to age me, but I've seen enough enough decades under my belt to sort of see this, where Australia, in my mind, is probably suffering from the result of being too comfortable. We've for a long time since we've been to war. If you put the Afghanistan and Middle East situation aside for a while, and other policing actions, even during the global financial crises with the American housing market imploding, taking the world down, we sold all our gold to Germany and China, and we cashed out on that, and we kept digging things a hole. We've been fairly comfortable, and I think when you go back in human history, massive shifts in innovation come out with world wars or major crises. And I think one of the challenges that I'm seeing is that we've been so comfortable that we haven't need to innovate. And I think I'm keen to get your thoughts on this, actually. One of the challenges I see out there is we get these very, very myopic, blinkered views of what solutions might look like. Is it all green? Is it all hydro? Is it all nuclear? Is it fair to say, or is it reasonable to say, that there's a balance, that it isn't all nuclear, it isn't all green, it isn't all X, Y, Z? I mean, we can't switch off coal, we're dependent on that, but we also can't spin up nuclear overnight. It takes a couple of years to build those things. But with the appropriate planning, is it fair to say that we can leverage the best of everything? We just need to be a bit more strategic and smart about it.
Yeah, I think, besides France, which has gone very, very high penetration of nuclear, but they also have renewables. No one else is seeing. It's not a renewables only. It's not a nuclear only proposal, right? It's an all of the above. That is a key difference, because Chris Bowen and Labor say no, we're going to hit 95, 98% renewable. That sort of seems, to have concentration risk associated, right? A mix of technologies, would to me seem to be the safer bet. So I think that is just logical common sense. Yes, these things do take time to build, although if you have a government that's all rowing in the same direction, this can be done. And the issue that we have upcoming on an election is Mr. Dutton may pull off a victory in the lower house. He won't get control of the Senate, given that only half the Senate is up for election this time. And therefore, if he needs the Senate to pass a nuclear-based energy strategy, what does he do? And my view there is he's forced into calling a double dissolution. He's elected on the premise of building nuclear. He can't do it, right? Well, let's turf everyone out, which again will take time. But you need to have a dedicated, both sides of Parliament, bipartisan approach. And if you look at what's happening in the US at the moment, and their federal politics over there are a complete mess. The one thing that the Democrats and the Republicans can agree on is nuclear energy. Literally the only thing. And both of them are saying, building more nuclear, reforming the nuclear regulator over there to make things more pro-development, all sorts of things. And it is bipartisan. We need that in Australia.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, one side's very happy to continue to support the weapons side of things to protect the planet, and the other side's in many ways protecting the planet and green and safe energy in the form of nuclear. And I think it escapes people. I forget the exact statistic. I did look it up the other day, sorry, but the number of households, when we mentioned before that 73 million households in America provided energy from a nuclear source. I forget the percentage of that, but it's quite high.
Mm.
And you mentioned something around just getting to a monoculture environment. I guess that's the risk we have now, where base loads are effectively coal-fired power plants. We are drawing a lot of green energy in various spaces, but it isn't necessarily the thing that happens when we turn our lights on. And at nighttime, when the sun isn't out and isn't making the planet hot and causing hot and cold inversions and allowing wind to happen, turbines aren't a great deal of use, and we aren't creating solar energy. But I guess that long-term, what needs to happen, and if we think beyond the political element as a society, if we sort of imagine, political parties come and go every 4 years, and they may or may not get a second term. But what does Australia need to be thinking about? And you're working in this space with regard to your drilling, your exploratory work, your work with the likes of ANSTO, using their as a service capabilities in your research of what you're digging up. But when we think about, as parents and raising our kids, when we think about people running businesses, what are some of the conversations that you're having in your boardroom that you'd like to see people having in their own boardrooms around sort of the next 10 or 20 or 30 years with regard to their energy requirements, kind of, some of the infrastructure they're rolling out that could have a medium to long-term impact if they could just start thinking about how do they transform their operational models and their businesses, how they look to invest into that space. What sort of conversations do they look like?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think I personally think the science of climate change is much more settled now than it was 10 years ago or so. Yes, there are still fringes that probably sit on the right of the political spectrum that say climate change is a scam. I would say that, guys, look, even if you don't believe in climate change, surely it's just not good to pump out carbon shit into the atmosphere day in, day out. Zero emissions is better.
Yeah. They're on the side of caution, right?
Yeah, and so, you look at what's happening in what you call eco-modernism movement in Europe. It's now starting in Australia. And that is, greenies used to be tree huggers, but now they're sort of shifting to the fact that actually, the enemy is, amongst other things, carbon. And that's where eco-modernists are supporting, of nuclear eco-modernism would support genetically modified crops because they understand science can help us.
Yep.
And so I think when you look at that trend and you go, we've really got to be long-term understanding what technology can do for the world. The United Nations says, the United Nations out there, black and white, the world does not hit net zero without nuclear energy. We may decide not to build reactors in Australia, but many places around the world have no choice. They need it for their industrial heat, or residential heating, for power generation. They can't. Chris Bowen's renewables fantasy, if that ever happens in Australia, they know it doesn't happen overseas. Now, for us, I think what we're saying to the Australian government and the WA government in particular is we need to support our trading partners. They've all elected to go nuclear. Now, you may not, but they have, and they are desperate for our uranium because they want the uranium to come from Western, politically aligned friendly sources. There is a bifurcation in the market with this whole Russia thing going on. They want uranium from Australia and from Canada. And who are we, when our trading partners are calling out in their time of need, who are we to say, oh, sorry, we're not going to mine our uranium? We have a moral obligation to do it. In conjunction with, it's a win-win because, we get diversification of revenues, we get jobs, we lessen our reliance on iron ore, for example. So there's a whole lot of benefits to come from the fact of recognizing that nuclear is an integral part of the future industry. And that's something that the Aussie government hasn't got across yet, but those boardrooms in Australia, I would say, well, my sample set's probably a little biased, but the majority of boardrooms and people I talk to in industry and business leaders, under policy and government, are sitting a little bit behind. And what you need to do there is then interrogate, why is the Labor Party? And there's some history there and some things that might you know, as that gets sort of out into the public, people might go, "Oh, geez, that's not so
Yeah.
kosher."
I was on a flight coming back from the US a couple of months ago, and sitting next to an individual who was really engaging, really intelligent, and went on a couple of rants that interested me. And the end of one of them, which was a very anti-nuclear position, I asked if they'd had anyone in their family that had any cancer challenges, and it turns out they had. Their entire family, had, as far back as they can measure, had a range of cancer issues, from bone, breast cancer, lung cancer, etc., even one with brain cancer. So I asked them if they knew where most of the research that went into solving cancer went into, and they were shocked. And I said, so can we work out, are you pro-nuclear when it saves your life, but I don't understand the other rationale, right? And it was interesting because by the end of the flight, this character actually came and stood next to me at the carousel waiting for our bags and just said, that was an interesting wake-up call, because it's not whether you're right or wrong. It's just I become so bipolar about this whole thing with what I'm being fed in
Yeah, well,
not
we
just
need it. We need a bit more of you.
well, and yourself as well.
You need to be on every flight at every carousel.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because here we are in these enclosed spaces where we've got to get along with people, and we do our best to get along because we don't want someone angry in business class with us. But we can then have a proper discourse, whereas I think people throwing stuff at each other in the streets, and governments lobbying stuff across the floor isn't necessarily a great, or it isn't always conducive of good conversational outcomes. And that's why I was kind of interested in about boardrooms are generally somewhere where adults get together and have a sensible discourse, and I think that's where a lot of strategic thinking needs to come about. And I'd be keen maybe if you can wrap us up with sharing your thoughts around the space, with particularly the next 12 to 18 months and what it might hold for Australia, and particularly some of the economic impacts we're seeing now. And of course, with your focus on the energy sector and mining, but maybe other broader areas, as we spoke with, whether it's health or transport or exports and so forth, or even just the general tech sector, next 12 to 18 months with all the things that are going on now. What are your sort of thoughts on what some of those impacts? I mean, you've touched on a few of them, like exporting uranium, for example, for our partners and other markets, health. But I'd love if you could just wrap us up with your sort of thoughts, where people can think about kind of areas where that might be impacting they didn't appreciate, and what they might be able to do about that.
Well, look, I mean, the next 18 months there's full of elections, number one.
Yep.
And who knows how they'll all come out. We've had the Northern Territory election on the weekend, a resounding success for the Liberals and some bruising outcomes for Labor. And it would be incumbent on Labor, by the way, to work out why that's happened. And my point on that is Labor's anti-nuclear stance is ideological. They will try and dress it up as economic, but it's not. And the reason they dress it up as economic is because generally the Aussie electorate doesn't like ideology. It doesn't sell well. Right. And so I think you're going to be seeing some very interesting things coming out of that. We're going to be seeing AUKUS continue to deliver. Now, AUKUS was a masterstroke of genius by the Liberal Party in that it has in one fell swoop gotten rid of the taboo of discussing nuclear in Australia. It has also meant that as Labor has endorsed it, they can't argue about nuclear safety anymore because, well, we're about to have floating nuclear reactors. Actually, there is one now in Perth undergoing maintenance, a US Virginia-class submarine. They also cannot argue about nuclear waste because actually, hey, we have to store nuclear waste as part of AUKUS. So AUKUS will continue, and that helps the civilian industry. That said, I don't think AUKUS is going to be smooth sailing at all. I must admit. I think trying to take a US nuclear doctrine, a submarine doctrine, and a UK nuclear submarine doctrine, and meld them into a best of both worlds to get an Aussie nuclear submarine doctrine, I think is problematic because those two doctrines are quite different. And so I think there will be cost overruns. We'll get some subs, that'll be good.
There'll be challenges.
They might not be. There'll be challenges
just with spelling normal English words, right? So we can't get English spelling sorted out. I think you're right. There's definitely challenges there.
So I think that's going to be interesting, but it will continue, I think, to be a popular policy, and therefore you will continue to see an evolution in the attitudes towards nuclear generally in Australia off the back of the military applications. And the other thing we're going to see is continued east versus west bifurcation that is already, we're seeing that in uranium, but follow that through into critical minerals, and China has a stranglehold on rare earths panel manufacturing, has a stranglehold on wind turbine manufacturing, and that whole east versus west divide is going to be something that continues to be a thematic over the next few years. Australia's, Made in Australia policy, as well as the critical minerals support policies, are all aimed at trying to break that sort of China stranglehold and move closer to the US on that. And it's going to be out in base of geopolitical concerns over Taiwan, and obviously the continued Russia-Ukraine situation. So, I'm a bit of a foreign policy and politics nerd. So, man, I just sit there, just mind blows every moment when all this stuff goes up. It's very interesting.
Yeah, a reminder that not so long ago, a British and a European, a British and American group tried to put a probe on the surface of Jupiter, and when it augured in at rapid speed, terminal velocity into the surface of the planet, they tried to work out what happened, and somebody forgot to convert inches back to centimeters and kilometers back to miles, and hundreds of millions of dollars just went into dust, and albeit that a long way away. But as you said, we are well beyond that whole conversation of, is there safety in nuclear, because we are now investing one of the largest capital investments this country's ever made in anything, particularly security and defense, in a platform that is entirely nuclear powered, and it is going to be on our doorsteps and, as you said, in our ports. Interestingly enough, I saw a thing the other day that for the first time, an Australian actually sat on the steering wheel of a nuclear sub that was coming in and out of research as part of the AUKUS program, which was kind of interesting. So if we're trusting an Aussie to sit at the steering wheel of a nuclear submarine that's part of that program, I'm sure we can trust them to be somewhere in Australia producing energy. Where can people learn more about your company and particularly get in touch with you? I think this is something that our audience is going to be very interested in, not only learning more about your organization and what you do, not just as far as an investment opportunity with Cauldron Energy Limited on the ASX, but also to look at the work you're doing, the research you're doing, and even potentially, whether it's peers or other companies that might want to learn and benefit and partner with you. Where can they reach out and get in touch with you and your company as a whole?
Yeah, so I'm known as the most responsive CEO on the ASX, actually. Now, I did that, deliberately. My predecessor at Cauldron, was not good at being responsive to shareholders. And so I put myself out there. My personal mobile phone number is on every one of our announcements. It's on our website, as is my personal email address. I'm very active on Twitter, X, as it's now called, with a handle at CXUASX. Or on LinkedIn. And, I'm very responsive. I love talking to stakeholders, shareholders, community members, anyone pro-nuclear, anti-nuclear, happy to have a chat. I think,
Fantastic.
Ensuring that we elevate the level of the discussion in the community is the only way that we make sensible decisions. So, yeah, please do reach out. And if you have any statistics, content questions, love to hear it.
Fantastic. Well, Jonathan Fisher, it's been so great to catch up with you. I look forward to having you back on the show. Amazing to hear some of the insights, not just from your role as Chief Executive Officer at Cauldron Energy Limited there, but also just around what you're doing with the industry and beyond sort of the core lobbying element of just your insights into kind of where Australia needs to be going in your view, and wholeheartedly agree with many of those key points. We're both old enough to have seen what was before and what was after. We will, for our audience, have full details of your website, your LinkedIn profiles, both you and your company, and relevant contacts. We would like people to go and have a look at your website and see some of the work you're doing. We would definitely recommend they follow you and the company handle on LinkedIn. You've got a really exciting active feed, and in fact, so much so that's actually part of what drove this conversation, because I've been meaning to reach out for a long time, and your ANSTO visit really fired me up, as you know. And I also would love for other parts of Australia to sort of look at this. I mean, I can imagine you could be a great percentage of schools and universities, colleges, to just help, get people thinking about some of the big topics we have. But Jonathan, it's been great to see you. Thank you so much for your time. I hope the rest of your day goes well, and I will really look forward to having you back on the show again soon.
Well, look forward to it myself. That's great. Thanks, Des.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.